Forget what Hollywood showed you about frontier justice. Behind the weathered walls of territorial prisons and county jails, lawmen employed punishment devices so brutal, so psychologically devastating, they would be considered war crimes today. These weren't medieval relics, but homegrown American innovations, designed by sheriffs and wardens who believed breaking a man's spirit was the only way to maintain order on the lawless frontier. Today we're exposing 17 torture devices that sheriffs actually used in Wild West jails. Methods so cruel most were banned before the 1800s even ended. Number 17. The sweatbox. Picture a wooden coffin standing upright in the blazing Arizona sun. Not quite tall enough to stand in, not wide enough to sit down. Just a cramped, airless box where a man could only crouch in darkness while the desert heat turned his prison into an oven. The sweatbox was the punishment of choice in southwestern territorial prisons during the 1870s and 80s, and it was designed to do exactly what its name promised: cook prisoners alive without actually killing them. Constructed from thick planks of wood, these boxes measured roughly 3 feet wide, 3 feet deep, and 5 feet tall. Guards would lock prisoners inside for hours, sometimes entire days, with no water and only tiny holes drilled near the top for minimal ventilation. As the temperature outside climbed past 100 degrees, the interior could reach 130 or more. Prisoners emerged soaked in sweat, delirious from dehydration, and often permanently damaged. The Yuma Territorial Prison in Arizona became infamous for its use of the sweatbox between 1876 and the early 1900s. Warden Thomas Gates believed the device broke even the most defiant inmates without leaving visible marks. Guards reported prisoners begging for mercy after just 2 hours, their skin blistered from the heat. But the psychological damage lasted far longer. Many who survived the sweatbox developed permanent claustrophobia and heat sensitivity. Yet while the sweatbox relied on environmental torture, the device at number 16 took a more traditional approach to breaking prisoners. Number 16. The Yuma Prison Ball and Chain. Imagine dragging 30 pounds of solid iron everywhere you went. Eating, sleeping, working under the desert sun, all while a heavy metal ball pulled against the shackle locked around your ankle. The Yuma Prison Ball and Chain wasn't just restraint. It was constant, unrelenting punishment that ground prisoners down physically and mentally, until compliance seemed like the only escape from agony. First introduced at the Yuma Territorial Prison in 1876, this device became standard throughout southwestern prisons and jails. Unlike lighter chains used for simple restraint, these were instruments of deliberate torture. The iron balls weighed between 20 and 40 pounds, connected to ankle shackles by chains ranging from 2 to 6 feet long. Prison administrators could adjust the weight and chain length based on the severity of the offense or the prisoner's perceived danger level. Wardens discovered the ball and chain served multiple purposes. It prevented escape attempts by making running impossible. It exhausted prisoners through constant exertion, leaving them too depleted to organize resistance. And it created a visible symbol of humiliation that reminded other inmates what awaited those who challenged authority. Prisoners worked in chain gangs, the rhythmic clanking of dozens of balls becoming the soundtrack of frontier incarceration. Medical records from the era reveal the lasting damage. Chronic ankle injuries, permanently damaged leg muscles, and spinal problems plagued former prisoners decades after release. Some never walked normally again, their gait forever altered by years of compensating for that dragging weight. Number 15. The pillory post. What do you get when frontier lawmen wanted public humiliation to reinforce punishment? A device borrowed straight from colonial America, refined with frontier brutality. The pillory post forced prisoners to stand for hours with their head and hands locked in wooden boards, exposed to whatever abuse the town decided to deliver. And in the Wild West, that abuse could turn deadly. Unlike eastern pillories that stood in established town squares, with some semblance of oversight, frontier versions appeared wherever sheriffs planted them. Outside jailhouses, in the center of main streets, sometimes right next to saloons where drunk cowboys could participate in the punishment. The device consisted of 2 heavy wooden boards hinged on one side, with 3 holes cut through both pieces. The prisoner's neck went through the center hole, hands through the side holes. When the boards clamped shut and locked, escape was impossible. Sheriffs in towns like Dodge City, Tombstone, and Deadwood used pillories throughout the 1870s and 80s for offenses ranging from public drunkenness to theft. The punishment typically lasted 4 to 12 hours, but the real torture came from the crowd. Rotten food, stones, human waste, anything townspeople could throw pelted the prisoner. In winter, men froze standing immobile in blizzards. In summer, they baked under the sun with no water. Several documented cases from the 1880s describe prisoners dying in pillories. Dehydration, head trauma from thrown objects, even mob lynchings when crowds worked themselves into a frenzy. The device disappeared from most frontier towns by the 1890s, but not because lawmen developed mercy. Number 14, the Oregon boot. Picture a device so heavy, so restricting, it turned walking into an excruciating challenge and running into an impossible fantasy. The Oregon boot wasn't designed for escape prevention. It was engineered as mobile torture, a punishment prisoners couldn't escape because it traveled with them everywhere they went. And unlike removable shackles, this device became a semi-permanent part of the prisoner's body. Invented by Warden J.C. Gardner at the Oregon State Penitentiary in 1866, the Oregon boot revolutionized prisoner restraint across the frontier. The device consisted of a heavy iron band that locked around the ankle, connected to a rigid iron frame that encased the prisoner's foot and lower leg. The whole apparatus weighed between 5 and 28 pounds, depending on the prisoner's offense severity. A hinge at the ankle allowed minimal movement, but the weight and restriction made normal walking nearly impossible. What made the Oregon boot particularly brutal was its permanence. Unlike chains removed at night, prisoners wore these devices 24 hours a day, sometimes for months or years. The constant weight caused severe muscle atrophy in the affected leg. The iron bands chafed skin raw, leading to chronic infections. And because the boot prevented natural ankle movement, prisoners developed permanent mobility issues even after removal. Frontier prisons from California to Texas adopted the Oregon boot throughout the 1870s and 80s. Prison records from San Quentin and the Wyoming Territorial Prison describe prisoners permanently crippled after extended use. Some lost the ability to walk without assistance. Others developed gangrene from untreated wounds beneath the iron bands. Number 13, the dark cell. Imagine total darkness, not the darkness of a moonless night, but absolute suffocating blackness where your eyes strain uselessly for even a glimmer of light. The dark cell was frontier punishment stripped to its most psychologically devastating essence. No physical torture, no visible scars, just isolation in complete darkness until a man's mind began eating itself from the inside out. Built into the basements of major territorial prisons and larger county jails, dark cells were specifically constructed to eliminate every trace of light. Thick stone walls, doors without cracks, sometimes multiple layers of barriers to ensure no illumination penetrated the void. Dimensions varied, but most measured roughly 6 feet by 8 feet, barely large enough for a prisoner to lie down. No windows, no furnishings except a waste bucket, and absolute silence except for the prisoner's own breathing. Sheriffs and wardens used the dark cell for prisoners who refused to comply with other punishments. Time inside ranged from days to weeks, with some documented cases of prisoners spending months in total darkness. The psychological effects were catastrophic and often permanent. Prisoners emerged unable to tolerate daylight, their eyes damaged from extended darkness. Many developed severe mental illness, hallucinating voices and phantom images. Some lost the ability to form coherent speech. The Wyoming Territorial Prison maintained one of the most notorious dark cells in operation from 1872 through the early 1900s. Prison records describe guards hearing prisoners screaming and clawing at stone walls, the sound muffled by the thick barriers designed to contain even noise. Number 12, the shower bath. What sounds like a refreshing amenity was actually one of the most terrifying torture devices in the frontier prison arsenal. The shower bath had nothing to do with hygiene and everything to do with simulated drowning. Guards would strap a prisoner's head back, position them under a continuous stream of water, and let nature do the work. The prisoner couldn't move, couldn't breathe properly, and faced the very real possibility of drowning or suffocating. Introduced in several eastern prisons during the 1850s, The shower bath migrated west with prison administrators who brought their punishment methods to territorial institutions. The device consisted of a chair or platform where guards strapped the prisoner in place, tilting their head backward at a severe angle. A water source mounted above, either a barrel with a controlled spout or a pump system in more sophisticated installations, delivered a steady stream directly onto the prisoner's face. The torture began immediately. Water flooded the nose and mouth, triggering the drowning reflex even though the prisoner's airway remained technically open. Gasping for breath only pulled more water into the lungs. The sensation was identical to waterboarding, a technique that wouldn't receive its modern name for over a century. Sessions lasted anywhere from 15 minutes to over an hour, with prisoners emerging traumatized, sometimes with water in their lungs, requiring medical attention. The Colorado Territorial Prison employed the shower bath throughout the 1870s and 80s. Warden reports described it as highly effective for breaking prisoner resistance without leaving permanent physical damage. But former prisoners told different stories: nightmares of drowning, panic attacks triggered by rain, permanent psychological trauma that made even bathing an ordeal. Number 11. The straitjacket. Picture a garment designed with a single purpose: to make a human being completely helpless. The straitjacket appeared in frontier prisons during the 1870s, borrowed from insane asylums where it restrained violent patients. But sheriffs and wardens quickly discovered its potential as a torture device when combined with extended duration and additional restraints that pushed the human body beyond its limits. The frontier version of the straitjacket was far more brutal than the medical restraint it originated from. Made from heavy canvas or leather, it featured long sleeves that extended well past the hands. These sleeves crossed in front of the prisoner's body and connected to straps that pulled tightly around the back, forcing the arms into an unnatural position across the chest or stomach. Additional straps at the waist and sometimes the legs ensured total immobilization. The real torture came from duration. While asylums used straitjackets for hours during acute episodes, frontier prisons left prisoners restrained for days or even weeks. Unable to move their arms, prisoners couldn't feed themselves, couldn't relieve themselves properly, couldn't even scratch an itch. The forced arm position caused severe muscle cramps that evolved into lasting nerve damage. Circulation restriction led to swelling and tissue damage. And the psychological impact of total helplessness broke even the strongest wills. Prison records from the Montana Territorial Prison and the Nevada State Prison document extensive straitjacket use during the 1880s. Guards reported prisoners begging for release after just 12 hours. Those who spent days in restraints often emerged with permanent arm mobility issues and deep psychological trauma related to physical restriction. Number 10. The thumb screw. Imagine a device so simple, so compact, it could fit in a sheriff's pocket. Yet this small tool delivered pain so intense, so precisely targeted, it could reduce the toughest outlaw to a sobbing wreck in minutes. The thumb screw was medieval torture brought to the American frontier, and sheriffs in smaller jurisdictions without access to elaborate prison facilities discovered it worked perfectly for extracting confessions and breaking defiant prisoners. The basic design hadn't changed much since the Middle Ages. 2 flat metal plates connected by 1 or more screws at the sides. The prisoner's thumb, or sometimes multiple fingers, went between the plates. As the sheriff or deputy turned the screws, the plates compressed together, crushing the digit between them. The pain started as intense pressure, escalated to crushing agony, and could progress to broken bones and permanent disfigurement if the torturer kept turning. Unlike large devices that require dedicated spaces, the thumb screw's portability made it the perfect tool for frontier lawmen dealing with uncooperative prisoners in small county jails. Sheriffs in remote territories during the 1860s and 70s often carried them as standard equipment. Need a confession? Apply the thumb screw until the prisoner talked. Want to punish without leaving visible marks on the face or body? The crushed fingers told their own story. Historical accounts from the Kansas and Dakota territories describe sheriffs using thumb screws during interrogations throughout the 1870s. The device left prisoners with permanently mangled digits, destroyed fingernails, and chronic pain that lasted decades. Some lost the use of their thumbs entirely, unable to grip or hold objects properly. Number 9. The whipping post. What do you get when you combine public humiliation with raw physical brutality? The whipping post, a punishment device so common in frontier justice that nearly every established jail kept one on the premises. This wasn't the quick, performative whipping of Hollywood westerns. This was systematic, brutal flogging designed to shred flesh, create lasting scars, and serve as a permanent reminder of what happened to those who broke the law. The frontier whipping post came in several variations, but all served the same purpose. A sturdy wooden post, usually 6 to 8 feet tall, anchored firmly in the ground. Prisoners were stripped to the waist and tied facing the post, arms stretched overhead and secured with rope or iron shackles. This position left the back completely exposed and vulnerable to whatever implement the sheriff chose to employ. And those implements varied widely. Leather straps studded with metal, bullwhips, cat-o'-nine tails with knotted cords, even modified wagon whips designed to cut deeper with each strike. The number of lashes depended on the crime, ranging from 10 for minor offenses to over 100 for serious violations. Each strike laid open skin, creating wounds that often became infected in the unsanitary conditions of frontier jails. Texas county jails and Arizona territorial prisons maintained active whipping posts throughout the 1870s and 80s. Court records document sentences of 50, 75, even 100 lashes for crimes like horse theft, assault, and escape attempts. Prisoners who survived severe whippings carried the scars for life, their backs a roadmap of raised, disfigured tissue. Many developed chronic pain and mobility issues from damaged back muscles. Number 8. The water cure. Picture a prisoner strapped to a board, tilted backward with their head lower than their feet. Now imagine gallons of water forced down their throat through a funnel until their stomach distends grotesquely. Their lungs scream for air, and their body convulses in the primal terror of drowning. The water cure was American innovation at its most brutal, a torture method refined during westward expansion and employed by frontier lawmen who discovered it, extracted confessions faster than any beating. The procedure was horrifically straightforward. Guards secured the prisoner to an angled board or table, often using leather straps at the wrists, ankles, chest, and forehead to prevent any movement. A funnel or tube was forced into the prisoner's mouth, sometimes with a wooden bit to keep the jaw open. Then the water began flowing, not a trickle, but a steady pour that filled the mouth faster than the prisoner could swallow. The natural response was to swallow frantically, pulling water into the stomach, but the flow never stopped. As the stomach filled beyond capacity, the pressure became agonizing. The abdomen swelled visibly, pressing against internal organs. Breathing became nearly impossible as the diaphragm compressed. Many prisoners vomited, only to have the process begin again immediately. Sessions could last over an hour, with gallons of water forced into a single prisoner. The physical damage included ruptured stomachs, aspiration pneumonia from water entering the lungs, and severe internal injuries. The New Mexico Territorial Prison documented extensive use of the water cure during the 1880s. Former prisoners described the procedure as worse than any beating, the sensation of drowning from the inside out, creating lasting psychological trauma. Number 7. The picket line. Imagine standing on your toes for hours, your entire body weight balanced on a single point of contact, no larger than a coin. Arms pulled behind you and secured overhead, making any shift in position impossible. This was the picket line, a torture device that turned gravity itself into an instrument of agony. Simple, requiring almost no equipment, yet capable of inflicting suffering that lasted long after the prisoner was finally cut down. The setup was brutally efficient. Guards drove a wooden stake or iron spike into the ground, leaving just the tip exposed, roughly 6 inches tall. The prisoner was positioned with one foot's toes balanced on this single point. Their arms were pulled behind their back and tied to a rope or chain that extended overhead, preventing them from leaning forward or shifting weight. The only choice was to balance on tiptoes on that narrow point, or let the full body weight hang from the arms. Most prisoners could maintain the position for only minutes before muscle fatigue set in. The calf muscles burned, then cramped agonizingly. The toes bearing all the weight began going numb, then erupted in pain as circulation was cut off. When the leg finally gave out, the prisoner's full weight dropped onto the arm restraints, wrenching the shoulders and potentially dislocating them. Guards would then force the prisoner back up onto their toes, beginning the cycle again. Frontier military prisons and some civilian institutions employed the picket line throughout the 1860s and 70s. Army records from Fort Leavenworth describe soldiers subjected to the punishment developing permanent foot deformities, shoulder injuries, and nerve damage in their arms. Number 6. The iron gag. What happens when frontier lawmen wanted to silence a prisoner completely while simultaneously inflicting constant, inescapable pain? They reached for the iron gag, a device so cruel its very existence seems like something from a horror story rather than American legal history. This wasn't punishment for information. This was punishment for the sake of suffering, designed to make speaking impossible while creating agony with every breath. The iron gag consisted of a metal framework that fit around the prisoner's head, similar to a bridle on a horse. But instead of directing movement, this device controlled speech through pain. An iron bit, sometimes studded with sharp points, was forced between the prisoner's teeth and locked in place. Straps or chains connected to this bit ran over the prisoner's head and down their back, creating tension that pulled the bit deeper into the mouth with any movement. The genius of this torture lay in its simplicity. Any attempt to speak pushed the tongue against the iron bit, causing immediate pain. Swallowing became agonizing. Even breathing required careful control to avoid pressing against the metal. If the prisoner's head dropped forward in exhaustion, the tension increased, driving the bit harder against the soft tissues of the mouth. Sessions lasting hours left prisoners with shredded tongues, broken teeth, and jawbone damage. The Kansas State Penitentiary and several Colorado territorial facilities documented iron gag use during the 1870s. Prison records describe it as highly effective for controlling prisoners who incited others or refused to remain silent. Former prisoners reported permanent speech difficulties, chronic jaw pain, and dental problems that persisted decades after release. Number 5. The sweat chair. Picture a wooden chair in a small, sealed room. Seems harmless until you realize the room is heated to over 140 degrees. The prisoner is strapped immobile in heavy clothing, and the only moisture available is their own sweat pooling beneath them. The sweat chair was psychological and physical torture combined, breaking prisoners through extreme heat, while the restraints prevented any relief through movement or removing clothing. Introduced in several Western prisons during the 1880s, the sweat chair refined the concept of the sweat box into something even more insidious. The chair itself was solidly built, with straps at the wrists, ankles, waist, and chest to completely immobilize the prisoner. Guards placed the chair in a small room with a wood stove or other heat source that could be stoked to raise the temperature to dangerous levels. Prisoners were often dressed in multiple layers of clothing before being strapped in. As the temperature climbed, the torture began in earnest. Unable to remove clothing or wipe away sweat, prisoners quickly became drenched. The heavy fabric trapped heat against the skin, accelerating dehydration. The immobilization meant no air circulation across the body, no relief from the oppressive heat. Sessions typically lasted 2 to 6 hours, though some documented cases describe overnight confinement. The physical effects were severe. Dehydration led to kidney damage, heat stroke caused permanent neurological issues, and the psychological trauma of being cooked alive while unable to move created lasting mental health problems. The Wyoming Territorial Prison and the Idaho State Penitentiary both employed the sweat chair extensively during the 1880s and early 1890s.
Number 4. The bucking strap.
Imagine being bent backward over a barrel until your spine screamed in protest, then having your wrists and ankles tied together beneath the barrel to lock you in that agonizing position. The bucking strap wasn't designed for quick punishment. It was engineered for extended torture that targeted the back, shoulders, and legs simultaneously, while creating a feeling of total helplessness that broke even the most defiant prisoners. The setup required only simple materials: a sturdy wooden barrel, approximately waist-high, and strong rope or leather straps. The prisoner was forced to bend backward over the barrel, their spine curved unnaturally around its diameter. Guards then pulled the prisoner's wrists and ankles together underneath the barrel and bound them tightly, creating tension that prevented any movement. The prisoner's full weight pressed their back against the barrel's hard surface, while the binding created constant strain on the shoulders, arms, and legs. The torture intensified over time. Within minutes, the back muscles began cramping from the unnatural position. The shoulders ached from being pulled backward. The binding cut off circulation to the hands and feet, creating numbness followed by excruciating pain as nerves protested. Breathing became difficult as the bent position compressed the chest cavity, and there was no escape, no way to shift position even slightly for relief. Texas County jails and New Mexico territorial facilities documented bucking strap use throughout the 1870s and 80s. Duration ranged from 1 hour to entire days, depending on the prisoner's offense. Former prisoners described permanent spinal damage, chronic back pain, and shoulder problems that made physical labor difficult or impossible. Number 3. The ankle shackles with spikes. What do you get when frontier prison administrators decided standard shackles weren't punitive enough? They added inward-facing spikes, transforming a simple restraint device into an instrument that inflicted constant, unavoidable pain with every step. The ankle shackles with spikes turned walking into torture, sleeping into agony, and any attempt at escape into a guaranteed path to severe injury or death. These modified shackles appeared in several territorial prisons during the 1870s, though their use was controversial even by frontier standards. The basic design started with heavy iron bands that locked around both ankles, connected by a short chain that limited stride length to prevent running. But the inner surface of these bands featured rows of dull spikes, typically 1 to 2 inches long, that pressed against the ankle and lower leg with every movement. The spikes weren't sharp enough to immediately pierce skin. Instead, they created constant pressure points that became increasingly painful over time. Walking drove the spikes harder against the flesh, creating bruises that never had time to heal. The pressure damaged nerves, leading to chronic pain and numbness. Sleeping required careful positioning to avoid putting weight on the shackles, making rest nearly impossible. After weeks or months, many prisoners developed permanent nerve damage and mobility issues. The Arizona Territorial Prison at Yuma experimented with spiked shackles during the 1880s before abandoning them due to the severity of injuries. Prison records describe prisoners with infected wounds, gangrene requiring amputation, and several deaths attributed to complications from the devices. Former prisoners reported being unable to walk normally even decades after the shackles were removed. Number 2. The ring bolt. Imagine a massive iron ring bolted directly into solid stone. Now, picture yourself chained to that ring in a position so restrictive, so carefully engineered for maximum discomfort, that hours feel like days and days feel like weeks. The ring bolt was frontier prison architecture designed around torture, a permanent fixture that transformed specific cells into suffering chambers where prisoners could be secured in multiple positions, each more agonizing than the last. The ring bolt itself was deceptively simple. A heavy iron ring, 6 to 10 inches in diameter, secured through a thick bolt anchored deep into the prison's stone floor, wall, or ceiling. But the genius of the device lay in its versatility and permanence. Unlike portable restraints that could be removed when not in use, the ring bolt was always there, always ready, a constant reminder of what awaited those who violated prison rules. Prisoners could be chained to floor-mounted ring bolts in a kneeling position, wrists secured to the same bolt as their ankles, forcing them to remain bent forward for hours or days. Wall-mounted rings allowed guards to suspend prisoners with their arms overhead, toes barely touching the ground, creating the same shoulder-wrenching agony as the picket line, but with the added suffering of complete immobilization. Ceiling-mounted rings enabled even more creative torture positions, including suspension by the wrists with weights attached to the ankles. The Montana Territorial Prison maintained ring bolt cells from 1871 through the early 1900s. Prison records document prisoners secured to ring bolts for up to 72 hours without release, forced to urinate and defecate while chained in place. The psychological trauma of being reduced to such helplessness, combined with the physical agony of forced positions, broke prisoners faster than any beating. If you've made it this far, you clearly care about the real history hiding beneath the sanitized stories. Hit that subscribe button so we can keep digging up the truth they don't teach in schools. Number 1. The Chinese water torture. The most psychologically devastating torture device in the frontier prison arsenal wasn't about immediate pain or physical damage. It was about the slow, methodical destruction of the human mind through a method so simple it seemed harmless. The Chinese water torture, adopted by several Western prisons in the 1880s, proved that breaking a prisoner didn't require violence. It required relentless, maddening repetition that transformed a simple drop of water into an instrument of insanity. A prisoner was strapped to a board or chair, unable to move their head more than a fraction of an inch. Positioned directly above, a water source released a single drop every few seconds onto the exact same spot on the prisoner's forehead, again and again and again, for hours or days at a time. The first minutes were merely annoying, but as hours passed, the repetition became maddening. The anticipation of each drop created anxiety. The inability to move generated frustration. The knowledge that this could continue indefinitely, that there was no escape, only endless drip, 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 began eroding sanity itself. Former prisoners described it as worse than any beating. The drops caused no physical damage, but the psychological impact was catastrophic. Prisoners emerged unable to tolerate dripping water, running faucets, rain. Many developed severe anxiety disorders and insomnia. Some never recovered their mental stability. The Nevada State Prison documented Chinese water torture use from 1884 through the mid-1890s. What made this torture so effective was its perversion of something harmless. Water, essential to life, transformed into psychological destruction. The human mind proved remarkably fragile when subjected to endless, meaningless repetition. 17 devices, 17 ways to break body and mind. From sweatboxes to Chinese water torture, frontier lawmen use methods that qualify as war crimes today. These weren't justice. They were suffering machines built by men who believed cruelty meant control. The real West wasn't Hollywood's heroic sheriffs. Behind jail walls, prisoners endured systematic torture exceeding their crimes, left with permanent scars both visible and invisible. History buried these truths under frontier legends, but prison records and survivor testimony remain. These 17 devices prove the frontier's real monsters weren't outlaws. They were the men holding the keys, dispensing brutal agony as punishment.